Now, more than 400 businesses have been liquidated in South Africa so far this year. According to the most recent March 2023 Liquidation Statistics by Statistics SA, there were 168 liquidations during the third month of the year, and that has been the most on a monthly average. February saw 162 liquidations, while there were 81 in January. The number of liquidations actually decreased by 7.7% this year when compared to March 2022. Statistics SA says company liquidations decreased by 33 cases, while close corporation liquidations increased by 19 cases, and the total number of liquidations decreased by 11% in the first quarter of 2023 compared with the first quarter of 2022. The liquidations were spread across a number of sectors, and businesses at large have found it harder in March to make ends meet as they fork out more money every month to keep the lights on amid intensifying load shedding. And we have the International Monetary Fund on March 7th saying that the country's economy declined more than expected in the fourth quarter of 2022, with GDP falling by 1.3% versus a 0.4% prediction from economists. Professor Waldo Krugel, microeconomist and economic sciences lecturer in Northwest University, joins me now on Business Edge. Professor Krugel, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity.
So I want to start by contrasting some of the data that's come out from Statistics SA. And when you look at the data for Q1 of 2022 and 2023, there's been less liquidations in this quarter than there were last year. And that would sound like some good news. You would think overall, oh, fantastic, more businesses are actually staying open. But this 11% decrease quarter on quarter is not really as good as it looks, is it?
That's correct. It's still a decrease. It's a smaller decrease than previously, but businesses are closing. I think in the earlier numbers, you see some of the long-run effects of the COVID pandemic, which was then reinforced by the load shedding problems we've been experiencing. And the end result is the number of businesses are steadily decreasing, and that's really worrying.
So finance, insurance, real estate, and the business services sector were the most affected overall for the third consecutive month, with a total of 61 liquidations in March. Let's look particularly at this industry: finance, insurance, real estate, business services. What's driving liquidations in this sector in particular?
I think it's a combination of factors. That's currently also one of our biggest sectors, making a significant contribution to GDP. And to gross value added. So I think when the economy as a whole is struggling, that biggest sector is also the one that bears the brunt of this. A lot of different businesses are encapsulated within that description. I think when you hear finance, you think only banks and insurers, etc. But for example, even the security industry is regarded as a business service there. So it's a combination of a range of different businesses, and I think they are struggling for two reasons. You've mentioned the cost side, trying to work within the new boundaries set by load shedding, but on the other side of that, their customers are also struggling. Inflation's been high for a while now, and interest rates as well. And that means that whoever was buying those services are trying to cut back, and we see some of that in other indicators as well. For example, people giving up their insurance policies to try and get some additional money into their monthly budget to keep going.
Mm-hmm. So I want to stay with this industry because it's also the same industry that Q4 of 2022 was the one that was also most liquidated. So unfortunately now you have 2 quarters of liquidation, particularly hitting this industry very hard. And they even shrank by 2.3% on the back of low economic data in financial intermediation, insurance, pension funding, and auxiliary activities. So this is yet another quarter. Are we okay to say this is now a trend for this quarter? Is it enough of a red flag for us? And would you also consider how this industry's outlook will look towards the rest of the year if we've already seen 2 quarters of this kind of activity?
I think we are all waiting for the first quarter GDP numbers, but the high frequency data that's available really points to that kind of contraction that you talk about in this first quarter. When you look at business confidence, when you look at purchasing managers indices, all those are really weak and point to an economy that's struggling in this first part of the year. So it's not official yet, but I think the sector is going to have a tough start to the second quarter as well, which it doesn't bode well for employment in that industry as well.
So let's look at some of the other sectors in this report from Statistics SA. The electricity, gas, and water industry was the only listed industry with no liquidations, while the agriculture, hunting, and forestry industries, as well as mining and transport, all saw just one case of liquidation each. So what does this tell us particularly about maybe the health of these other industries and what's happening there?
I think when it comes to electricity, gas, and water, there are not a lot of players in that particular sector. So they are providing essential services. They don't have a lot of competition. They tend to be really big firms, even state-owned enterprises gets counted there. So the end result is, if it goes badly, you don't see much change. If it goes really well, you also don't see much change. But the other two tells you something about the structure of the South African economy, that even though finance and these business services now makes up a big part of the economy, the mainstays are mining and agriculture, which have been doing relatively well. We know that mining output declined over the course of the past year or so, but prices have been high. So the mining industry has been relatively profitable during this time. And the same, we experienced a really good agricultural season, 2 in a row now, and agriculture's been doing well. So in that sense, these liquidation numbers, they just end up confirming what we see in gross value added and output numbers as well.
Okay, so I think for the sake of clarity, it's also important for us to look at what the Statistics SA is terming as a business, so that we understand really the ramifications and how far this goes. So for the businesses that are captured in these industries, what are we looking at? One-man businesses employing 5 people, 10 people, turnover. Take us through that.
These are larger businesses and formal ones. So we don't see the impact on the informal sector, the small and the micro business. These are the big ones that officially are liquidated, where you close shop and you sell off whatever assets you have left. So in that sense, it doesn't really give us a measure of under how much pressure the firms that are still open but struggling, how much pressure they are. And I think that is quite significant. We are seeing the book being closed on a number of firms, but many more are shrinking. And just trying to weather a very difficult situation where your consumers or your customers are struggling and your costs are increasing at the same time.
And you've taken us into the challenges that businesses in South Africa are facing. So there's the high unemployment already, load shedding as well, the rising cost of living, high inflation. You have employees that are asking for more money because it's just much more difficult for them to have the salary that takes them home as well. So beyond those typical challenges we know of in South Africa, are there any other additional challenges that are putting more pressures on businesses in the country?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds in 2 parts. Internationally, like you mentioned in your headlines, there's a lot of uncertainty about where inflation and interest rates are going. And in other words, how our export markets are going to do in the rest of this year. And I think that is dampening investment and business sentiment in general. If you're worried about whether your foreign customers are going to have a strong demand this year. On the domestic side, there's a lot of policy uncertainty. We're heading towards an election next year. There's a lot of talk about the government being under pressure to get re-elected, and lots of different policies being implemented, or I should rather say being talked about, some of them implemented. And I think it causes businesses to say, we're just going to wait and see how things pan out before we invest and expand. At the moment, the investment that we are seeing is by and large aimed at possible solutions to load shedding, generators and solar systems.
Okay, so let's look at the impacts. We can't talk about over 400 businesses closing Q1 of 2023 without talking about the ripple effect of all of this. That's money that's not going into the economy, that's taxes not being paid by the companies or the individuals employed as well. And that's, again, people being thrown back into the labor market. I think I might have answered part of the question, but Professor Kruger, I expect you to do a better job than I have. In terms of the impact of these business liquidations on the South African economy, what are we looking at?
No, you're exactly right. There's no easy way to quantify this, mainly because the data doesn't quite link up, that you can identify the firm that was liquidated and then look at the number of employees, whatever they were spending on wages, etc. But you see these in the broader numbers. The job creation is down. When it does happen, it's informal employment for a big part of it. And people's take-home pays are under pressure. There is an index for that, and it shows that due to salaries not keeping up with the inflation rate, businesses not paying increases, bonuses as they did in the past, households are struggling. And then you end up with those demand for even higher wages, which I think just puts businesses under more pressure and causes them to look for alternatives. I think particularly in agriculture, we've seen huge improvements in productivity, but driven by mechanization and employing more capital in production. And all of this does nothing to address the key problems that we are facing.
And one of those key problems is load shedding. And a lot of the liquidations, as we've spoken about, are somehow tied to that. So when it comes to expectations and unfortunately predictions in this light, should we be expecting to see more businesses liquidated in the coming months throughout the end of the year, particularly tied to the prolonged power outages? Or will there be more factors that influence businesses closing their doors in South Africa?
I think it's going to keep significant pressure on businesses, no doubt. The extent to which there are more businesses almost on the cusp of liquidation, that's not clear or known from these data sets. But you can imagine that there were those ones that are still trying to keep it together, but costs are increasing and their customers are struggling. And the end result of that could be even more liquidations. It doesn't seem like there's a quick fix to the load shedding problems. So businesses who are able to invest and try and bridge those hours of no electricity through own generation, they are probably going to be the ones that are left standing at the end of this crisis. And the ones that can't afford those expensive solutions are the ones that are going to be under pressure and possibly closing as well.
All right, so Professor Kruger agreed, no quick fixes. We see government under President Cyril Ramaphosa trying to throw a lot of whatever it can to solve the electricity problem. But that's just one of the issues in terms of what government can do to turn around this situation. Because when the numbers come out from Stats SA, we did see a decline last year in terms of unemployment. But some have also said it's simply because people are no longer looking for the jobs. And so that just means they're not reporting that as well. But beyond the power situation, what else does government need to do policy-wise, intervention-wise, to turn this around? The backbone of any economy is a small, medium, and yes, even large formal businesses.
I think there are really good plans in the pipeline, and almost all of them are centered around the idea that the private sector should play a bigger role in collaboration with the government. That's the sort of talk that you hear when it comes to energy generation, to the turnaround of Transnet and the use of the rail infrastructure. And the plans have been there for a while now, and every now and then you hear of a possible agreement being reached, etc. But that hasn't really caught major momentum yet, that the private players are participating at scale in these industries where the challenges are. And I think if government can speed up that and then keep to their promises of the limited investments that they are able to make in these network industries, that will help to carry us a bit further. I think in terms of policy certainty, if they can stick to the plans and implement them faster, that will give the private sector some confidence to also invest in their own businesses and their own expansion as well.
All right, so we'll leave the conversation here for now. Professor Waddle Krugo, microeconomist and economic sciences lecturer at Northwest University. We'll be expecting more data from Statistics SA, and we'll be looking to you to help us break it down, particularly for what it means for the South African economy. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And as my guest has said, it might be quite difficult to quantify what it means to have over 400 businesses close their doors, the number of employees that will now be back into the labor markets, and the stress and pressure that will find its way into households across South Africa. It is, some might say, not such a staggering number when you consider the number of businesses that there are in South Africa, but it is something that will, of course, raise some red flags because it could become a trend that would be very difficult to reverse. And that wraps it up on our conversations here on Business Edge for today. You can follow us on social media. We're at News Central TV. Don't forget to make it a date with us Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. West African time, where we put African business, African economies, and African finance front and center right here on Business Edge. At 12 p.m. West African time, you have News Central Now with all the latest from here on the continent and beyond coming your way. I'm Tolu Lokwe Adeleru Balogun. Do have a fantastic day.